What I do with the Catholic Psych Institute is try to heal the rift between psychology and Catholicism. That's our mission. And specifically, we do that by integrating Catholic theology and philosophy with sound psychology. And so everything that we look at through the lens of psychology is grounded in some way in Catholic truth. And if you don't do that, then it's a waste of your time. And there's a lot of bad psychology out there because there's been a lot of people doing that for a long time, not grounding it on truth, taking shots in the dark, hypothesizing without any philosophy or reason or understanding of who the human person is. And especially when the majority of people that we're working with are disordered in some way, it does not seem like a viable way to carry on a project to make assumptions about the human person based on limited experience of human disorder. So that's what we're doing, is we're grounding on something bigger, objective, transcendent, ultimately the flourishing that we're all called to. So that's what I'm going to try to present for you here today. This is going to be a little project. Let's see if we can make it work. If we can take theology, biology, and psychology and bring it all together to try to go a little deeper in understanding something about our human experience. Specifically, I want to talk about marriage, obviously, and complementarity. My proposal is this. Pope Benedict wrote a letter that's incredibly important, letter to bishops of the Catholic Church on the collaboration of men and women in the church and in the world. And he proposes this, and I'm just going to regurgitate what he proposes. So I'm following on his heels here. It's that there's complementarity for a purpose. Instead of thinking about men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and just leaving it there, calling it a day, we have to ask the question, why? Why are we different? The phrase is complementarity ordered towards unity. That's what we're looking for. But the problem is that's not where we start. And so we have to figure out how to deal with this. You know, if we're at the point where you can't look in the mirror and realize that there's a difference between a man and a woman, and I'm not sure there's really any room for dialogue or discourse. So we're going to move past that. I'm going to assume that we all have that kind of reasonable perspective, and we know that there's a difference between man and woman. And in doing so, we're going to do this, like I said, again, with the integration of the theology, the biology, and the psychology. And what we're going to do is we're going to make two passes. So we're going to first go through with a little bit of theology, we're going to talk about some biology, and we're going to come back around for psychology. And the first pass, what we're doing here is we're going to understand the masculine and the feminine genius. Now, this is a term that you've heard before, I'm sure. John Paul II coined the term feminine genius. At the time, he was responding to the world's need for a value of women. He didn't get into the masculine genius yet, but that's where we can go also. There's a lot of talk about what that means without being grounded, and there's a lot of theory, even amongst Catholics, even within the faith, and there are good attempts, but sometimes they miss the mark because they're just theory. There's hypothesis without grounding it. We are a unity of body and spirit. And so what we're going to do is start off just a very quick pass through theology. My favorite line from the Theology of the Body, where John Paul II says, the body and the body alone makes visible the invisible, the spiritual and the divine. Okay, so this is theology. We don't need to go too deep into that right now, but he's telling us immediately that there's this is the answer, this is the antidote and the healing to Cartesian dualism, where we believe that the body and spirit are separate things, that we only really exist. You know, we think we all leave our bodies and sort of ascend to heaven. We leave this dirty material stuff behind. That's actually heretical. We are a unity of body and spirit. So we need to heal that idea and we need to heal that experience so we understand ourselves as embodied spirits. So John Paul II sets us on the right path here. The body and the body alone makes visible the invisible. So what we want to say about man and about woman, the invisible realities, what is the masculine genius, what is the feminine genius, we should be able to pin that to biological realities. If you can't pin it to a biological reality, it's not true about the human person. So this will keep us safe in the middle without falling off the edge. And again, like I said, even in faithful Catholic, teaching in circles, I've seen people attempt to explain what is the feminine genius or the masculine genius without grounding it. So we need to ground it because we're human. So if we go to the biology, we will discover that we have significant brain differences. We have significant body differences that we can see when we look in the mirror. But we can go past that. We can look more clearly at the brain and figure out what's going on here that's different. So I have just a few examples of some of the things that are different between a man's brain and a woman's brain. But this is because we have the technology now to actually look into the brain and see the way that it works. The female brain has more communication and connection across hemispheres. The brain is more connected. What this means is that for a woman to arrive at an idea, she's utilizing many more aspects of her environment. She's pulling in data from many places at once. And because of all those connections that are going across, she doesn't necessarily have a simple and clear understanding of where a particular piece of information comes from. Now, this is something that we come to understand as a woman's intuition. This is important, and this is real, and it's biological. Now, how many times, men, have you been in an argument with a woman, and you're trying to prove your point? We've seen that already, so we know. And you're trying to prove your point, and you say, I will be happy to give in. Just tell me how what you're saying makes sense. It's not that I have to be right all the time. I'm be happy to be wrong. Just tell me how I'm wrong. And then the woman, in total frustration, pulling her hair out, says, I don't know. I just know you're wrong. That's because of the difference between the man and the woman's brain. She really doesn't know how she's right. This happened between my wife and I once. Only once. In the first week I was married. My response, I was actually right about the argument taking place. However, I was totally wrong in the argument. And that's because I lost sight of the relationship. I lost sight of the connection. I lost sight of what was most important. It wasn't important which way you put the toilet paper on the roll. I was right. The paper has to come out. That's scientifically validated, by the way. Unless you have a cat, then you can flip around. Another story. I was wrong in the way that I was talking to her. I was wrong in the way that I wasn't listening to her. I was wrong in the way I wasn't listening to everything else going on in the day. And I missed her. So she didn't know how to answer me when I was like, just tell me what's wrong about what I'm saying. She just knew that she felt crushed. She felt violated. She felt endangered. She felt like something was wrong. And I was wrong. So she doesn't need to have the same kind of compartmentalized thinking to arrive at that conclusion. Now, another aspect of this intuition is having a quality that I call the trans-rational nature of a woman's brain. Now, I say this first because the opposite of it is the rational nature of a man's brain. But I can't lead with that because then people think that the opposite is that a woman's brain is irrational. And I would get booed off the stage very quickly afterwards. So it's not irrational as the opposite of rational. Rational is a function of the compartmentalization in the way that a man breaks things apart and thinks about things. And women don't do that with the same immediate physiological substance of the brain. They're bringing together a lot of things at once. But here's why. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit as I bring this all together. But the primary reason for the feminine genius is that a woman is created to make human persons inside of her person. That's the fundamental difference between the masculine and the feminine genius. That's how we can split those two things apart. A woman is created to make persons inside of her person, and a man is created to make persons outside of his person. And anything and everything we can say about the genius of either can be tied back to those things. So a woman's brain, her body, her biology, her endocrine system, everything about her is made to make persons inside of her person. She needs to be able to know, how is my baby? And when that baby comes out and is pre-rational and pre-verbal, she needs to be able to know what's going on with that baby. Baby's crying. I walk into the room. And I have my checklist. When was the last time he ate? Does his diaper smell? Is he tight? Is he wrapped up too tight? Is it too warm in here? Does the baby need a nap? Right? I'm going down my list. My wife walks into the room and immediately she says to me, "Oh, take off that wrap. It's too warm." Like, where's your list? Did you go through it? Do you know when he ate? The intuition. It's a trans-rational way of communicating. She's not limited by the need to be compartmentalized and rational. So that comes from the brain. Men are more intrahemispheric. That means that between the left and the right hemisphere, there's less communication, but from the front to the back within each hemisphere, there's actually more communication, which means the executive functioning of the front of the brain can enter in more easily to put down emotion and to dissociate or step away from the emotion involved in a situation. And this becomes very important in matters of leadership and protection and provision, which are all qualities of the masculine genius. We need to be able to depersonalize. And that means we need to be able to shut down the feeling of a situation. Whereas a woman is ordered towards the person and wants to nurture relationship. Now let's move down a little bit further into the brain. We both have something called a mirror neuron system. And the mirror neuron system is the part of the brain that can see what's going on in the other person. Now the difference between the male and the female is that the male also has another thing that is kick-started by the mirror neuron system. This is called the temporoparietal junction. The TPJ is a problem-solving location of the man's brain. The woman's mirror neuron system triggers for her an anxiety, and it's through connecting by seeing her emotion being mirrored in another person that it relieves her anxiety. For a man, that doesn't relieve anxiety. It does the opposite. When a man connects with another person's anxiety, who he cares about, his anxiety is escalated. And it only comes down once he solves the problem that is hurting the person that he cares about. Do you see how understanding the brain can immediately bring so much healing into relationships? See, a woman doesn't feel connected with in that kind of situation. And her interpretation is he doesn't care about me because he's not sitting with my pain. It couldn't be further from the truth. It's the opposite. In fact, if you're a good man, two things are true. A lot of people ask you for help for things. A lot of people tell you what their problems are and want you to fix it. And number two, you don't care. If you're a good man with proper boundaries and you know what your role is, then you don't care about most of the people's problems that they bring to you. We have that ability to separate, to depersonalize, except for the people that we love. When we're engaged, when we care for people, when we know who is ours to protect and care for, and then we see a problem, it shuts down the rest of the brain. And we have one goal: fix the problem. Because we connected with the mirror neuron system, because we felt the pain of a person who we love, it's now our job to fix it. Let's look more closely at the body. When we can see, without going too deep into the physiology, we can see that the woman's body is made to make bodies inside of it. And so her endocrine system, all of her neurology, her developmental psychology is all ordered towards this reality. And it's important to understand here too that this is whether or not a woman ever has a baby. We're not talking about what actually happens. We're talking about what she's made to do. So if there's infertility, if there's a single woman, if there's a consecrated woman, femininity is always the same. And it's based on the fact that the body of this woman is made to make bodies inside of it. And so we can understand more about that feminine genius by going deeper into that. And this is a reality that girls experience immediately as soon as they're aware of anything. Young girls growing up know their older sisters, their moms, their older friends, the women in the community. They know that the period is coming. What is that scary thing? They know that men are more scared of their period than they are. It's a dirty word. Don't ever even say it. That reality is automatically a thing that separates men and women and creates this anxiety. So it's a part of the developmental psychology as well as the developmental biology of the woman. And then there's a whole slew of hormones that are radically different in the man's brain and the woman's brain. So in the female, we have oxytocin, dopamine, estrogen that work differently in the brain. And all of these structures and functions are ordered towards relationality. And we can see that because she's a person made to make persons inside of her, she's ordered towards developing and forming a deep relationship with another person. Meanwhile, the man's hormones, testosterone, vasopressin, are ordered towards aggression, provision, separating from people. There's a contrary effect between oxytocin and testosterone. Where there's aggression, there's not alignment in affiliation. We need one or the other. If we know there's somebody that we need to take out, we can't like them. So this is a significant difference in a man's brain from a woman's. So here we have the biology here that paints a picture and gives us a basis for the masculine and feminine genius. And we can circle back around now with psychology and go a little bit deeper. 2 notes here. It's generalized. These are general observations. So this is not saying every man and every woman is clearly the way I'm articulating it. There are individual differences between men and obviously between cultures and everything else. When we talk about complementarity being ordered towards unity, complementarity does not start in marriage. So a lot of times I'm giving these talks, I'm talking about this is man, this is woman, this is what happens and all this stuff, and I have a wife or a husband that looks at me and says, well, that's not me. That's not my spouse. Your science is wrong. Your philosophy is wrong. The fact is that the complementarity has to start in the home. From the moment you're conceived in the womb. Prenatal psychology, something John Paul II asked for 20 years ago, and we're still just getting started with understanding it. The environment in the womb and the environment the baby is born into significantly impact the neurological development, nurturing these aspects of formation. So if a man is not able to understand his calling to sacrifice and surrender himself, which is part of the calling of a man, to be able to suffer, it's not because he's not a man, it's because there's a wound. Because for whatever reason, the complementarity didn't happen from the beginning. So just keep that in mind as just in context as I'm going through some of these other things. Now, we have the complementarity of a person made to make a person inside her body and a person made to make a person outside his body. And the whole thing comes together beautifully. It fits together. God made us in our very being, in our very nature, to be married and to have babies. He built this whole thing out of our telos, our goal, our end of bringing new life into the world. Our metaphysics, our ontology, our biology, our everything needs to be pro-life. Pro-life is not just about abortion. It's about transforming the way we see everything. Our very existence is pro-life. Our very masculinity is ordered towards bringing babies into the world. Our femininity is ordered towards bringing babies into the world. How far off are we when we denigrate each other because of this masculine quality, because of that feminine quality? We have entirely missed the boat. So that's why I say we need to go beyond the battle of the sexes. That is not a solution to just understand the battle. We need to understand the why. And it's because we are a unity. We are called and created to be a unity. And understanding the gifts and talents of the man, the gifts and talents of the woman, we understand that we need one of the people on the team to be focused inwards. And then she doesn't have resources to be looking out around, wondering where food's coming from, wondering who's protecting the borders and all this stuff. So that's the guy's job. And it's kind of a schleppy job if you really think about it. So the woman is totally turned inwards and nurturing this relationship with this person that she co-created with God, and the man now has to get to work. That's why he's out or here. That's why he's less personal. That's why he's more compartmentalized. So man and woman are made to make persons together. One on the outside, one on the inside. And when we come together with that, we understand the masculine and the feminine genius. Now, this genius must be lived out for the proper execution of your vocation to grow in holiness and the proper education of your children. If you do not fulfill your role as a man, you're not giving your kids a model of masculinity if you have boys, and you're not giving your daughters the complementarity they need. And we can say vice versa for the mom. So let's break down what is the genius then. Woman's genius. She is a nurturer. She is ordered towards persons. Being loved affirms that she's doing her job correctly. I'm going to actually map these next to each other so we can move through this quickly. A man, however, the masculine genius is to be a leader, provider, and protector. And he's affirmed in doing his job when he is respected. So you've probably seen those books, Love and Respect. The idea is that love is the affirmation that the woman is who she is, and respect is the affirmation that the man is who he is. And all of this ties back to the biology. A woman needs to learn how to nurture others for their sake, not for her own. So we see a lot of that. There's a lot of disorder of that being inverted and turned towards oneself. And a husband needs to be capable of suffering and responsibility. This talk on how to raise men focuses on the idea of effeminacy. Effeminacy is the inability to suffer because of an attachment to a pleasure. That's a Thomistic definition of effeminacy. The inability to suffer because of an attachment to a pleasure. And as Father Ripperger tells us, you can have an appetitive effeminacy, a physical pleasure. You can have an intellectual effeminacy. You can actually cling too much to what you know. And if you're unwilling to let things go to serve a greater good, that's effeminate. So effeminacy is actually the sort of weak, limp-wristed guy that we think of usually with the word effeminate. And it's also the macho man who abuses women and sleeps around. He's effeminate because he is unable to suffer the experience, the discomfort of chastity, to live as a man for others because of his attachment to a pleasure. But this is what a man is made for. He's made with this testosterone because it throws him into the breach. It gets him to go out there and to not count the cost, to not think about how he's going to get hurt. It makes him a little bit stupid sometimes. But that's because God made him that way. And that stupidity needs to be formed and molded in the right direction. So a woman then, because of her genius, needs from a husband a number of things. A woman needs a husband who admires and maintains fondness for her, who expresses affection clearly and often, who will fight for her and fight for the marriage. And here is one of the most convicting things I have ever heard. A woman's greatest threat is her husband. When a woman makes herself vulnerable to her husband, not only because of the emotion, but because she's made to make a baby inside of her body, she's made to connect, and she needs the connection and the devotion and the loyalty. You as a husband are her greatest threat, and your first and most important and maybe only role of protecting her in your whole life is protecting her from yourself.
I'm Bishop Eugene Hurley from the Diocese of Darwin, which takes in the whole of the Northern Territory of Australia. And I'm delighted that Shalom Ministry is now in a position to bring some of that good news to the rest of Australia and indeed to the world. Because we live in a world where the media is so influential. It dictates so much of our learning and our attitudes. And so it's so important that the good news of Jesus Christ has to be made available to all people, because it's what we each need as human beings to enliven us, to make us more loving, and indeed to bring about peace in the world. So it's this good news that the Shalom Ministry is trying to get across to Australia now. And let me invoke God's blessing upon Shalom Ministry and all who work within it and all who are the subject of its good work. May the blessed Almighty God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit descend upon the Shalom Ministry and all who work in it and all their families. May keep them at peace forever. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.